The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is on life support right now. It's fighting every day just to survive. Lobby dodging still hasn't been properly addressed, matchmaking is still broken, the new player experience is unforgivably bad, there's loads of unacceptable bugs, the new DLC pay-to-win victim Virginia launched broken, and it took weeks before her skill tree could even be properly accessed at all, resulting in multiple refunds, all of which the TCM community is rightfully very pissed off about.
On behalf of all the community, can you apologize for everything your community is going through with your game? We never heard sorry. I'm not sure what there is that needs to be apologized for, but if you feel that an apology is needed, absolutely, I'll say it. I'm sorry.
Now, Gun has since gotten an F rating from the Better Business Bureau. Up until the recent update, virtually nobody wanted to play the family role. The new family character that was supposed to release weeks ago with Virginia has still not come out, with zero information on when that's happening, and the game still has a massive identity crisis between being a casual or competitive game. So it's currently just a disastrous situation through and through. However, for the first time since the game launched, there's a glimmer of hope for the future of TCM, and I'll talk about that more in detail later on in the video. But to start, we're going to go through all of these problem areas for the game and discuss what the developers need to do in order to actually solve these issues once and for all. Also, this is going to be a lengthy video, so if there's something you're interested in specifically, use the timestamps to jump directly to it. Alright, to begin, let's look at lobby dodging and matchmaking in general because they're intertwined. If a family player currently dodges a lobby, the matchmaking system does not know how to refill that spot, which essentially kills the lobby. So obviously the devs need to fix the technical backfill issue. It's less noticeable when there's more players and less dodging, but it's still really embarrassing because virtually any other developer I'm aware of would have had this issue fixed as soon as possible, like within a few days. And this has been going on since pretty much launch. It seemed like they had fixed it briefly at one point and then it broke again soon after. Nothing can save the Texas Chainsaw Massacre if this is not addressed, and hopefully very soon because it's gone on way too long already. The other side of the coin is family players dodging lobbies. For context, it's often taking victim players up to 15 minutes to actually load into a single match unless they happen to get lucky, whereas it takes a family player about 30 seconds on average to get into a match. Again, this is because when victims queue into a lobby, if a single family player decides they don't want to start the match and leaves, the lobby breaks, forcing everyone else to go back out to the main menu, regroup if they're in a pre-made group, and then search again, which takes a lot of time. Now first, let's talk about what the developers should not do. They should not punish lobby dodgers. Lobby dodging is a reflection of the current state of the game, right? If they get lazy, which is what this is, punishing players for dodging lobbies is a lazy alternative to actually addressing the underlying issues on why players dodge lobbies in the first place. I want to be clear. If they add in a DC penalty for dodging lobbies, not matches that have actually started, but literally pre-game lobbies, players are just going to quit playing the game altogether, right? And you might say, well, if they're lobby dodging, then I hope they quit. Good riddance. But that's short-sighted. If these players quit playing, then the only matches you'll really be getting is against brand new family players who have no idea what they're doing and are at a huge disadvantage due to all of the min-maxing, which everyone knows is just completely unfair, and their experience is going to be so awful that they'll just uninstall the game. They will, and rightfully so. And just keep in mind, the second there's no more family players, the game dies, right? So we need to be patient and address these core issues with the game before resorting to draconian methods. Now, if you are interested, I do go into the lobby situation in way further detail in my Texas Lobby Simulator video here, because there's a lot of reasons people dodge lobbies and it necessitates its own video entirely. But in this video, I want to focus more on the core issues with the game itself, all of which circles back to TCM's severe identity crisis. That is the game meant to be casual or is the game meant to be competitive? I frequent the forums, Twitter, YouTube, all pretty often to get a sense of how the community feels about the game, And what I see constantly is balance talk. Everyone has a million ideas on how to better balance the game. But the problem here is that we can't even begin to really have a balanced discussion because the game and the developers don't really know what the game is even supposed to be. They say it's supposed to be a casual horror sim that lets players experience the movie in video game form, but then betray that vision entirely with the most egregious leveling and competitive progression system I have ever seen in a multiplayer game, right? Abilities, attributes, perks, perk tiers, skill trees. It's insane. So in the developers' minds, they have made a casual game. If you don't know exactly what that means, I have a video explaining it in detail here. Now, because they believe they have made a casual game, they balance it for casual play. However, in reality, they made a heavily competitive game, and the effects of that are what's killing the game. First of all, casuals get dominated in this version of the game. Tryhards are going to exploit every imbalance that's meant for casual fun. So balancing a competitive game in a casual way is totally pointless. If you want to balance in a casual way, the game itself must be casually designed, which TCM currently is not. Another negative outcome of this identity crisis is that competitive players get frustrated because when other competitive players use completely uncounterable mechanics to beat them, it's an awful experience. An unbalanced competitive game is not fun for anyone. The ripple effect is that competitive players leave first because they see the imbalance early on and say, well, this is stupid, it's a waste of my time, I'm out. And then as more competitive players leave, casual players start to get the brunt of it, and then they leave as well, right? Because it's just not fun, and these people know that their time is better spent elsewhere. So at this point, Gun has to make a big decision on what the game is supposed to be, casual or competitive. Then they have to fully commit their balance and design to that vision. And people who say that players make any game competitive and it's not the developer's responsibility, that's just not entirely true. This is not a fantasy world where everyone is just going to choose to play a game in a casual way, right? We have to be realistic and understand that design and balance direction do have a major impact on how the gameplay flows. Now let's explore these options. Let's make it easy for the developers and really look at both of these options in detail. Option 1, make the game casual. Although this is my personal preferred option for the game, it's also the most unlikely to happen because in order to balance the game for casual play, it requires a heavy redesign of a lot of the core game mechanics, which is not something developers like to do. It takes a lot of time and it's a huge risk in their eyes. The reason a redesign is required for a casual direction is due mainly to the fact that Gun picked a terrible format for creating a casual game. 3v4 has a very tight threshold for making a game where one side is supposed to be powerful, right? They've sort of shot themselves in the foot before the race even started, and now they have an uphill battle with making the game work casually because the game can't be casual in an organic way. The casual gameplay has to be somewhat forced. If you don't know what I'm talking about, let's use Friday the 13th as an example. It was a 1v7 game, which was a much better format for creating a casual horror sim because obviously Jason had to be powerful enough to deal with 7 victims at one time. In TCM, if the victims are as weak as they were in Friday, then matches would be over in minutes every time. The family would just obliterate all of the victims. Often matches can play out like this now, where Leatherface will kill all 4 victims in the basement super quickly. That's fun for the Leatherface, but that's not fun for anyone else in the match, whether they're victims or Leatherface's teammates. Also, getting killed super fast as a victim just does not feel good. Like, Johnny can melt victims with the right build, but that's again just not fun or interesting for anyone else but the Johnny player. Likewise, if they make the victims too powerful, it makes the family not feel threatening whatsoever and more of a speed bump that the victims need to get around, which is just a terrible experience for family players and also betrays the entire concept of the game. And there are just endless clips of this happening in the game on both sides. So how do they force casual gameplay in a 3v4 game that's been designed to be played competitively? Well, in a casual redesign, the game has to be slowed down. And most importantly, every match needs to feel like a story, like you're experiencing a short version of the film. There needs to be a personal connection between all of the players in the match as the match plays out. In order to make this work, the family needs to be powerful and threatening, and yet at the same time, the victims need to be survivable. The gameplay loop must move away from just killing and escaping. I know another game that fully committed to the idea of kills and escapes, and it didn't turn out well for casual play. Instead of did I win, the more important aspect in a casual game is did I have fun? So the primary mechanic in making this work is what I'm going to refer to as the hunger mechanic. And it's sort of going to act as a rage mechanic that makes the family more deadly at certain times throughout a match. When the victims first escape at the beginning of the match, the hunger mechanic maxes out, which allows the family to execute one of the victims upon downing them. So pretty much how the beginning of a match works currently. Once a victim dies, however, the hunger meter resets. During this time, victims cannot be executed. Instead, upon being downed, they would need to be recaptured. Much like how Leatherface brings victims to the gallows, family players would be able to bring victims to different areas like freezers, the dinner table, hooks, and leave them there until they get rescued or are able to slowly rescue themselves. Capturing a victim would reward the family players with as much XP as a kill does. The hunger meter would rise slowly throughout the match and as victims got closer to escaping. Progression equals aggression. If the victims start rushing too hard, the meter maxes out again and they're more at risk of being executed. Again, every time a victim is executed, the hunger meter resets. Also, if the hunger meter reaches max, the family can execute one of the victims that are currently captured. So victims would have to make the choice whether to push objectives and let their captured teammates be executed or redirect their focus on rescuing that captured teammate instead. I would also massively encourage the devs to look at making the game a 3v5 as well. There's 5 victims in the vanilla game, so it is not an impossible thing to ask for. It makes victim queues better, it allows family to be stronger without breaking the balance of the game, and it allows this casual redesign, or any casual redesign, to work significantly better. I'd also reintroduce proximity chat from Friday into the game so family and victims could communicate in game. Would this be used for toxicity half the time? Of course it would be, but it doesn't matter, and over time it would actually bring both sides together more, just like it did in Friday. Obviously, proximity chat is an opt-in feature anyway, and losers that do take it too far with toxicity would just be banned like they are currently in the pre-game and post-game lobbies. I just don't see any good reason not to add it to the game. It also incentivizes people to want to be on comms more, which is something that really needs to be in the game because a lot of people just don't use comms and it really makes it more difficult to play the game when people aren't talking. So again, what are the intentions of these new mechanics? If done correctly, this casual redesign makes every match into a story. It allows for the pacing of the game to flow more organically and stays true to the original casual version of the game and movie that the devs actually intended to create but ultimately failed to make. Alright, now it's time to explore the alternative and unfortunately more realistic idea of balancing the game for competitive gameplay. Now I know the developers truly don't believe they have made a competitive game, but they absolutely did, and they need to accept that if they ever want to bring people back to playing it, right? I want to use Gears of War as an example here. Epic originally developed Gears into a tactical cover-based shooter, but they accidentally made a game that was way more fun to bounce around and have the Star Wars equivalent of a lightsaber duel, but with a shotgun instead. Now, they could have balanced that out of the game and ruined it because it wasn't intended, but instead they leaned into their accidental success, and now there's an esports league dedicated to it because the formula is so original and fun. A similar thing happened with DBD and chase-oriented gameplay. The point is that multiplayer games have a sense to take on a life of their own, and developers have to decide whether to roll with it and embrace it or ultimately destroy it. So if we are willing to accept the reality of the situation, let's talk about competitive balance for TCM. First, let's address the elephant in the room. Why are so many family players unhappy with the current state of the game? Now, you're going to hear a million different opinions, but the truth is that it's not really a balance issue. It's a design issue. And remember, we're no longer talking about a casual game here. We're talking about a competitive, full meta, no mercy, win at all cost type of game. So on the question of, is family too weak? No, not necessarily. For example, if you have 3 tryhard family players on comms playing perfectly, you'll win almost every match. Even in a solo queue lobby as family, you'll usually win with good teammates who know what they're doing. So why is the experience still so miserable? Now, the best way I can describe it is to use an example from Dead by Daylight. A while back, a new killer was added to DBD called the Skull Merchant. Now, by all means, she wasn't a very interesting or strong killer in any fundamental way. However, she was virtually unbeatable if the player was using a 3-gen strategy where she would pick 3 generators that were close together at the beginning of the match and to use her ability to make it nearly impossible for the survivors to do those generators, which in turn made it nearly impossible for the survivors to win. So even though the Skull Merchant wasn't inherently strong at killing survivors, she could still win every match by playing in a very specific and extremely uninteresting way, and that's exactly how it feels to play family in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Victims can complete objectives so quickly in this game that family players are forced to become skull merchants in order to defend them. So what TCM really needs for competitive gameplay that isn't just balanced, but also engaging, is more of a back and forth gameplay dynamic. Currently, victims pretty much win the game the second an exit gate is open. It's like a checkmate in chess, and it's incredibly uninteresting, which leads to chess merchant type gameplay. So in order to address this, family needs more ways to reset objectives so they're more inspired to play the game like a human and less like an AI. People want to have agency and feel like they can play the game in different ways without auto losing or throwing, right? Which is what the current state of the game is in, and it's why most people quit playing family or constantly lobby dodge and DC. It doesn't have to be egregious, but resets should make sense. Relock a door at least a set amount of times, even if the locks are less powerful. Remove the fuse out of the fuse box or the wheel off of the pressure tank. It makes zero sense that these are not options for family players. Like, you have to understand that the game is essentially over when one of these objectives is completed. Imagine if the game just flat out ended the second a single member of the victim team died, just instantly over in that moment. That would be awful. Nobody would want to play victim anymore, and rightfully so. It's dumb. So on to the next big issue with the game, rushing. Usually this is referring to victims rushing their objectives super fast. I've had multiple games where victims escape the family house before I'm even able to walk to it from my spawn point, which any unbiased person knows is silly and unfair. So one way this could be mitigated is by making the non-Leatherface family members spawn at the same time as victims. Currently, all family players must watch the full Leatherface cutscene for no good reason at all, and that should be changed. Another drastically important change that's going to have victim mains livid is to nerf wells. Right now, using a well has virtually no downside. If a victim is seen, the first thing they do is run straight to a well and reset. In higher level games where the players have really min-maxed their builds, victims will use wells constantly to the point where they're being treated like a fast travel system. So there's 2 proposed changes that can be made to wells. And as I'm saying this, I know diehard victim mains are frothing at the mouth, but they do need a change. It's just the truth. Now, I would only start by implementing one of these changes, not both at the same time. The first idea is that wells start out covered, and the victims need to perform an action like 3 seconds long with a lot of noise, or longer if they do it silently, to remove whatever is on top of the well. Then the well becomes available to use. This puts victims in a situation where they need to consider an escape plan before pushing objectives in the area. So it's up to them. They can take the chance and push the objective, but if they get caught and the well is still covered because they didn't take the time to uncover it earlier, then they're going to be in a really bad situation, and it's ultimately their fault for being greedy. This also leans into punishing rush meta quite heavily as well. The other option is more simple, which is make it to where victims always get incapacitated when using a well, unless maybe they have a perk to counter it. This would make wells more like hook states from DBD, and victims would really have to only use the well as a last resort instead of it being their go-to option like it is currently, because after the 3rd use they would just bleed out and die. Like I said before, only one of the 2 of these options would be good enough. However, it is vital that wells stay in the game because resets are necessary for the flow of a 3v4 game. Imagine if there were no wells when playing victim. You would basically just die every time you got cut out in the open. It's the same reason family members also need a reset as well. You should never lose a match until you've actually lost the match, right? Otherwise, you're just wasting people's time. Now, on the flip side, victims are also somewhat forced to rush because of Grandpa. With blood builds, family can max out Grandpa to level 5 in just a few minutes, giving them full aura reading on every victim, which just ruins the pacing of the match. So to fix this, Grandpa needs a bit of a rework. First of all, level 5 Grandpa should not really even be possible until the match has maybe reached the 10-minute mark, or if there's only one victim left alive. Until then, level 4 Grandpa should be maxed. Grandpa perks should also be revisited. Currently, Grandpa perks are randomly assigned in order at the beginning of a match, meaning family can have the best Grandpa perk in the game at level 1, or if you're in solo queue and your teammates are terrible, which is usually the case, your S tier Grandpa perk might get sent to level 3 Grandpa because of a stupid chicken perk and Wind Doom on a map that doesn't even have windows at level 1 and 2, which is insanely frustrating, right? So to fix this stupid inconsistency, Grandpa perks should now all activate at level 1 Grandpa, but with different tiers as Grandpa becomes stronger. For example, Suffocating Grip, the best Grandpa perk in the game that makes close encounters more favorable, would now make them 10% easier at level 1, 15% easier at level 2, and then 20% at level 3. This streamlines the system and lets players use bad Grandpa perks without unintentionally throwing the game and trolling their teammates like they do right now. While we're on this subject, exterior alarms should no longer work on basement doors. With all the other changes, it's too much and promotes brain dead gameplay if we're being totally honest. Now let's talk about close encounters and stuns in general. Right now, victims can abuse the grappling in the game by forcing a grapple on a family member that victim is basically guaranteed to win, which then applies a 5 to 10 second stun to the family player. There's no counterplay to this at all, so obviously it has to be nerfed, and surely it will be, but in general, anything above a 5-second stun is unacceptable in any scenario. And it doesn't even matter what game it is, that's just terrible design. Stuns always feel bad in video games, so that should just be a golden rule. I often see my teammates literally DC when they get hit with this. It's just one of those things that is fun for one side, but ruins the game for the other side, so those things need to be kept in check, especially mechanics that are so heavily ping reliant or easily abusable with a macro. Now, one thing I did not mention up to this point is the attributes and perks system. That's because this system needs revamped in any version of the game, and Gun has already confirmed they are working on that, but I want to focus in on attributes here because they should not exist in their current form. They add absolutely nothing to the game. They ruin the new player experience completely. They make the high level play impossible to balance and force meta into the game. So what I would do with attributes instead is make them do nothing in-game at all, and instead tie them into the new perk overhaul system. For instance, if you have 40 points into proficiency, that would grant you access to more perks based around proficiency, right? Or for family, 40 savagery would grant you access to perks like Serrated. Alternatively, they could also use them as a currency for perks instead, so Serrated would cost 30 savagery points, for example. Something like that would be fine. Just get them the hell out of the gameplay. This is not Skyrim. We don't need attribute points and min-maxing in any version of this game, whether it's casual or competitive. While we're on this subject, let's talk about the new player experience because it is just awful. I'd say unplayable even. As a new player, you are going to do nearly 0 damage as a family player and die in one hit as a victim. That's on top of just trying to figure out how the hell the game even works. It's just completely unfair. Unfortunately, the player base is currently too small to incorporate any kind of matchmaking brackets for new players, so it's imperative that something is done to at least mitigate how terrible the experience is. Obviously, the best solution is to get the min-maxing out of the game, like I just said. Then when the game does start to do better, there can be a matchmaking pool for players like under level 20 and better parameters like matchmaking pre-made groups against each other so that the solo queue experience is better. I don't want this video to drag on forever though. I think generally the main ideas have been presented. Obviously, I can't cover every single outlier and every single problem in detail in this video, or it would be 10 hours long, so you'll have to use your imagination and fill in the blanks for now. Keep in mind the ripple effects of these changes I proposed as well. A lot of the massive issues like map design can't really be properly assessed until balance changes are tested out. That said, before we end the video, I want to talk about the good news. If you remember, I said there was some good news. It truly looks like TCM is setting itself up for a serious comeback. A few months ago, the devs said that they planned on supporting the game up until only August of this year, 2024. However, recently, they said that they were working on content for 2025. That means internally, they have created a plan for success. Part of this plan was obviously swapping Sumo Nottingham out for Black Tower Studios, which I'm assuming Gun believes is going to do a much better job at managing the future of the game. This was no small decision on Gun's part. Swapping out studios massively delayed content releases for TCM, so I'm assuming again that they felt it was worth it in the long run, which is important to take note of. Gun has also hired a dedicated studio to make cosmetics for the game, so we're going to be getting a lot more cosmetics. Hopefully there's no more Spotify playlists involved in the pricing. We're also going to be getting 2 updates per month, one major and one smaller, with a DLC drop in each update, whether minor or major, and a lot of these cosmetics will be free as well, like the recent all black outfit variants unlocked for hitting level 99. So if you read between the lines, there's a lot more confidence and actual hope for the future to get this game off life support and thrive. Like I said, for the first time ever since I played the technical test and realized the game even back then was headed for a train wreck, this is the first time I'm feeling optimistic about the future, but in the end, only time will tell. I'm always wondering, if DBD had launched today at the state it was in back in 2016, would it immediately die like most other new ASIMs do now? I'm not sure. That said, let me all know what direction you want to see TCM go, casual or competitive. And as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.